Greetings everyone, and welcome to another one of my videos. I'm Charles Bernard, and I am a professional paperback book cover illustrator who also founded the Online Art Academy, where you can learn the all-important fundamentals. My art course is called the Complete Illustration Art Course, since it has been specifically designed for those of you who want to become illustrators or concept artists. What you learn about illustration is also applied to concept art. The course is affordable to everyone who is serious about wanting to learn the fundamentals, which is the knowledge you're going to need if you ever hope to move your art from the beginner stage to the professional level. If you are a beginner who is taking my course, you are at the most exciting stage right now because you really don't know anything yet. And you're going to be learning new things every day, accumulating more and more knowledge. Your understanding will grow, and that is something that should be very exciting to you. If it's not, then you're in the wrong profession. You need to look forward every day to learning new things about art that you're going to be able to apply to your drawings and paintings. And you're going to see your work progressing from that beginner stage where you really don't know anything to more advanced stages until you finally end up producing really great work. It's not going to be easy, however. You have to understand that anything worth attaining in life that is of the highest level can only be gotten through hard work and the accumulation of knowledge and an understanding of that knowledge that you have gained. That's the only way. There's no easy road toward becoming a great artist. So unless you're willing to put in the hard work, it's not going to happen for you. And now it's time to start the lesson. This video is specifically on rhythm. If your work, your drawings and paintings, doesn't have rhythm, it's not good. It doesn't matter how carefully you rendered the object, how much care you put into putting all those little details into the object that you've drawn or painted. If it lacks rhythm, it's still not a good drawing or painting. Rhythm is part of structure, so if you're establishing a structure, such as the structures that I've been talking about in my videos on the underlying structure, or the structural concept, as I also refer to it, you will have seen me doing various sketches that have different kinds of structures, such as, for example, this structure, which is the cross structure, and it, as you can see, consists of straight lines. However, there's also a different kind of structure that is not predominantly made up of straight lines. The structure that I'm going to show you now by doing a little diagram sketch like this one can be called a web structure. This kind of web structure is especially found in landscapes because nature is alive and you have to get that feeling of life across. And these rhythmic, flowing, moving lines get that feeling across of something alive, something organic. So let's say you want to do a drawing of a landscape. You begin with this web structure in mind, which means that you're thinking in terms of rhythmic, flowing lines like this. And they are the implied lines. This could be the contour or edge of, let's say, clouds. So here I'm just roughly sketching in these clouds here. You don't see an actual line. It's the gesture, the movement, that's the gesture that you need to establish. Don't start drawing like this, where you begin with the edge of a cloud like that, and then you add more little curves like that to produce the edge of a cloud. No. You begin with the rhythm. You have to establish the rhythm first, and the rhythm is this, that curvilinear line.
that rhythmic line, the big sweeping lines, the big rhythms, the main lines. And then you add these little irregularities at the edge once you have the big rhythms established. So here you see that rhythmic line. And beginners, they are going to start this way. They'll draw a cloud first like that, then they'll draw another cloud, and let's say another cloud, and they completely ignore the big rhythms that establish this web structure. And the reason they ignore it is because they don't know about this. So they do this careful drawing of one cloud and the next, completely unaware of these kind of underlying rhythms that have to be established first. And so the beginner ends up with a drawing that doesn't have this kind of flow and rhythm to it, this lifelike quality. I'm going to add another flowing, rhythmic line right there like that. If I add a tree, I have to think in terms of the long axis of a shape. So here's a shape. The long axis is, of course, this. So in order to get this feeling of life and movement into a tree, you don't draw a tree like this, like that. That doesn't get that feeling of life into the tree, that organic feeling. You end up with a stiff, lifeless looking tree. But if you think about the long axis as curving like that, a rhythmic line, and then you add a tree that has that kind of rhythmic long axis, now the tree looks much more natural and more lifelike than a tree like this that has a long axis that is straight and not curved. Instead of adding a tree over here, what I'm going to do is add some mountains over here, like that, following that rhythmic line that I established. You see, I'm not starting the drawing without that rhythmic line in there and adding mountains. I first establish this big, sweeping, rhythmic, curvilinear line. The rhythm needs to be established first, and then you build on that with your subject. And in this case, it happens to be these mountains that I'm adding here. So now this smooth, curving line like that is getting this more irregular edge to it, or contour, because of these peaks of the mountains. So when you add your rhythms like that, you add them in smooth lines without any irregularities at the contour or edge like that. That comes later, after you've established the rhythmic structure, the web-like structure, the big rhythms. And then you can go in there and add your subject, like I'm doing now with these mountains here. And then, since I'm going to have a lot of these rhythmic lines, I also need a straight line to give some relief. Otherwise, there's just too much of one kind of rhythm. So you have to add a straight line. And I'm going to do that by adding this horizon down here. So that adds some relief. And then you can add your tone. Now in this rough sketch that I started here, the way I can continue it is to repeat this rhythmic line that I established. And I'm going to repeat it over here like that. So now I have another rhythmic line, but I can't have too many rhythmic lines that are going in a similar direction. Therefore, the next line that I establish needs to oppose the direction of these two rhythmic lines. And I'm going to add that other opposing line over here, like that. This line is going in a different direction, or in the opposite direction that this line is going in. So what you need to do is establish a repetition
of similar directions, like, for example, down here. You see that line that I just added? The next line would be a line that's similar. They parallel each other, but not exactly. They shouldn't exactly parallel each other. So then I add another line, and that too repeats the other two lines, is also a rhythmic line, and it has a similar direction. So they are in parallel to each other, but not exactly parallel to each other. Otherwise, it becomes too monotonous when you repeat lines that are exactly parallel to each other. There isn't any harmony here. Harmony results from when the lines and the directions and the size of the lines are similar. But you can't just add a lot of similar looking lines or rhythms without adding an opposing rhythm. So the next line that I add would be a line like this. It opposes the direction of these lines. And let me get rid of this. This is in the way now. So I'll just paint this out. And then I could add another rhythmic line like that, again moving in a opposing direction to these lines. So that's what I established here. I have this rhythm, as I pointed out to you, which has this direction, and then I'm repeating that rhythmic line, which has a similar direction, and then I'm opposing those directions with this direction here. Now that I have these rhythmic lines here, they act as a guide for the placement of the clouds. So I'm going to add the clouds here, and you can see that I'm following that rhythmic line, but not exactly. There are some parts of the subject, of the clouds, that are extending beyond that line, and you can see that right there. Those clouds are not sitting exactly on this line, but the rhythmic line acts as a guide, a rough guide for the placement of your subject. And when you finish placing the subject on that rhythmic line, you still have to get the feeling that there is a rhythmic line there. Don't lose that, or you lose the rhythm. And now, for this other line back here that opposes these two rhythmic lines, I'm also going to be adding some clouds back there as well. Next, I think I'm going to add some birds, a large bird in the foreground. So what I'm doing is to first establish the rhythm. And this acts as a gesture. See that rhythmic line there? And now I can build my bird on that rhythmic line. And this is just a rough sketch of a bird. I'm not trying to draw a perfect, beautiful bird here. So here is the bird. And then what I'm going to do is add part of a mountain over here. The reason for that is to stop the eye from leaving the picture on the left side. This mass here and that jagged edge, they lead over toward the left. And if I didn't add that shape of the mountain, the eye would then move right out of the picture area at the left. So that shape is very important, and it also helps to point to the bird here. It acts as a pointer. So I just have to work on this a little bit more. And then the ground area here is going to be a dark value and getting lighter as it moves further back, something like this. Now there are two opposing rhythms here. First of all, there is this rhythm that I talked about, which is right here, this rhythmic line, which can be seen there and here. And then on that rhythmic line, I placed the clouds, which have a rhythm of their own at their edge, and that rhythm is these curves, you see. That sets up a rhythm. When you repeat curves like that. But I can't just have one kind of rhythm. a rhythm of these curves. A rhythm needs to be opposed by a counter rhythm. So it's rhythm and counter rhythm. And by me adding this part of a mountain here, that adds the counter rhythm. And the counter rhythm is jagged like that. It's this kind of edge. And by repeating that edge on the shape, which is also repeated on the distant mountain here, I'm setting up a counter rhythm, an opposing rhythm to the curved rhythms. I'm going to make some room on the left side here so that I have some space to work on. And this rhythm that I just pointed out to you, here's the jagged rhythmic line which opposes strongly these curves that are found throughout the sky area and these longer S rhythmic lines, or reverse curve lines as they're also referred to. So I have rhythm and counter rhythm. I don't have too much of just one kind of rhythm. I also have an opposing rhythm. This is what you need to establish, and this is what you find in the best paintings, in the best drawings. When the artist understands this need for rhythm and counter rhythm and knows how to apply it to his subject or her subject. Unfortunately, the beginner has no clue about what I'm talking about here, that there is this kind of opposing rhythm that needs to be established and that it underlies the subject, like in my little rough sketch here. You first have to establish this underlying rhythm. And this is what the beginner doesn't know about. They haven't learned this yet. But here, I'm introducing you to this idea, and hopefully you begin to understand its importance. However, it's also very important that you see many more examples and of different subjects to really fully understand this and to begin to realize the need for this within a picture. Now I have to add a little bit more to this mountain right over here because that cloud is moving the eye out on the left. So I can just extend this a little bit, something like that, and that stops the eye. Now this curve here, the edge of the clouds, leads the eye back into the picture like that to this cloud, and that cloud leads down like that to the mountain here, and the mountain points up to the bird. The bird becomes the center of interest, and then I'm going to repeat the bird getting smaller as the birds move further back into the distance. So something like this. This is just a rough sketch, and this line here I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to reposition the birds so they're going to be flying over toward the right a little bit like that. And the reason for that is because I want the eye to be led over toward this part of the painting. The eye of the viewer is going to follow the repetition of these birds. So now the eye of the viewer is being led in this direction to the mountain here, and the mountain is leading the eye back again to this mountain here, and that mountain is pointing up to the bird. So there is this circular movement that's going on. One of the most important things that you need to learn is this idea of harmony and contrast. The beginner, when doing a sketch, has no clue about what I'm talking about here and what I mentioned here. So therefore, the beginner, let's say, draws a mountain. This is how the beginner starts. And also the beginner focuses on details, starting right in on the little shapes, the little details that are part of a mountain. And then, let's say, there are some trees, so the beginner starts to draw one tree like this, and then draws the other tree, and then maybe there's a river. So the beginner starts drawing a river like this. So each part is worked on separately and thought of in terms of a separate part. The beginner doesn't see the whole and how each part relates to other parts. And then let's say there's another little mountain over here. So the beginner adds that mountain, and maybe there are little trees on that mountain like this. And then the beginner adds some clouds. Beginning a picture this way, like the beginner does, is a bad way to start a picture, because you're missing out on establishing this underlying rhythm that I talked about in this rough sketch here. The way you need to start is with this underlying rhythm. And unless you understand this kind of rhythm and are able to apply it to your pictures, you won't make any progress as an artist. Your work will not get better. That's how important establishing this underlying rhythm is. It must be part of the picture, or the picture will fail as a work of art. Every good or great picture has this kind of underlying rhythm to it. So the way to begin, as I showed you in this example, is to establish the big rhythms first. So let's say here I have the start of a picture by establishing this rhythmic line. And maybe there are some trees. Now you don't begin by establishing a tree this way like the beginner would start to draw this pine tree. You begin by establishing the big overall shape, the simple underlying shape, in other words, to the pine tree. Let me do this sketch again here of this pine tree. Okay, so this pine tree has a simple underlying shape. It's called an implied shape. And that implied shape is this. It's this triangle shape. So if you're going to be drawing pine trees, then you first establish this kind of triangle-like shape. And then in order to set up a rhythm, that triangle shape needs to be repeated. And as you can see, I'm repeating it. And then I can add a few more back here, smaller ones in the distance. So what I've done is I've first set up a rhythm of shapes. And there's also this rhythm of line as well. Rhythm of shapes, rhythm of lines, as I showed you in this example here. Therefore, I need to also establish maybe something like that. This kind of line on which these pine trees sit. It's the edge of a hill. Another thing that you have to be aware of, which I pointed out to you in this example here, with the repetition of these lines being in harmony. When you place a line like that, a rhythmic line, the next line you put down, you have to think about whether that next line should be in harmony with that line or should oppose it. Always think in terms of harmony and opposition. Is that next line going to be in harmony, or is it going to be in opposition to the first line? So I'm thinking, well, the line that I put down now, I want it to be in harmony. So the line needs to be in near parallel to the first line. Remember, exact parallel is this. Near parallel is this. They're not exactly parallel, and because of that, and because they are similar in size and direction, they are therefore in harmony. So this line has a similar direction to this line here, and therefore they are in harmony. Now I could add another line, and that line also is in harmony. It is in harmony with this line, and this line is in harmony with that one.
And what I did before I put down this line, I thought of what should that next line be? Should it be in harmony with this line, or should it oppose that line? And this line here, this long one, that one is carrying the eye right out of the picture here on the right side. Therefore, it needs to be stopped, and I could stop it by placing a large tree here. But remember, I'm just putting down a simple shape like this, just the outline shape of the tree. I'm not drawing a careful tree here like a beginner would first do. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to continue that line here, this one and that one. So let's say there's a road going back like that. And then I need to add a tree back here to stop the eye from wandering out of the picture because of that road. The road leads out like that unless I have something to stop it, and this little tree back here, that is going to stop the eye. So this is just a rough sketch, and I'm just showing you the importance of first establishing a rhythm. The rhythm of shapes creates a compositional movement because the eye follows these shapes. They set up a rhythm and the eye follows a rhythm. The eye links shapes together that are similar or the same, and therefore it moves from one shape to the next which is similar or the same, and to the next which is similar or the same, and so on. And because they are the same or similar, a rhythm is set up, and a rhythm moves the eye through the picture. Now, this line back here, I need to add another line, and I'm thinking, should that other line be in harmony with this line, or should that line oppose it? And I'm going to oppose this line by adding a line back here like that, this curve. Something like that. And it is in opposition to this line because its direction is this way, and this line has a direction this way. So there's an opposition of direction. Within the picture, you need to establish this harmony of lines and shapes and opposition as well. Always think of whether that next line should be in harmony with the first line or should oppose it. If you're a beginner, I know the way you start a picture. I know that when you start drawing your trees or whatever the subject is, and you place a line there, and then you're thinking about adding something else, another tree maybe, and then you add another line somewhere. You're not thinking in terms of relating this line to that other line. And you're not thinking of, is this other line that I'm adding going to be in harmony with the first line, or is it going to oppose the first line? But this is exactly the kind of thinking that you have to do if you ever want to produce something that is really great. All great pictures have this kind of harmony that I'm talking about, that the artist establishes right from the beginning when he or she is working out the composition. They're thinking in these terms. Is that line going to be in harmony with the next line, or is it going to oppose that line? But the beginner just starts putting down lines anywhere, all over the place, and not thinking about how that line relates to the other line. And therefore, the picture that the beginner finally winds up with is a picture that doesn't have this underlying rhythm of harmony and opposition. Now, getting back to my sketch here, once you've established your rhythms, then you can go in there and start adding the subject, whatever that subject is. In this case, it happens to be these pine trees, and you start making those simple shapes
look like the subject is supposed to look like. I'm just doing this real quick. You're building on that rhythm that you established. Now you begin to add the details. You begin to make the shapes look more like what the subject looks like. And then over here, where that rhythmic line is that I established, you can see that I already started adding this mountain. That rhythmic line is just a guide for the placement of the mountain in the background there. And that rhythmic line doesn't stay like this, like a smooth line. It just acts as a guide for other mountains that are further back. What's important when you begin a drawing is establishing the rhythm. So here's a photograph that will act as the raw material for a rough sketch. This acts as a kind of springboard for the imagination. You don't copy the photograph exactly the way it is, because if you do that, you're going to copy all of the errors that are part of that photo. So you need to learn how to organize a composition. And the rhythm that I'm talking about is the rhythm set up with the trees here, and I'm establishing the rhythm with these curves. And then instead of a straight line that you see here in the photo, this straight line of the hill right here, and I've made a curving line instead of a straight line to be in harmony with the other curves. So here's this curving linear rhythm that acts as a foundation for these various trees, and then I'll establish the lake that you see here as well as the hills in the far distance by adding curves. Again, this is a rhythm that I'm establishing that acts as the foundation for this picture, the foundation on which the more realistic images will be built, on which the details are added. But it's the rhythm underlying the more realistic looking images that needs to be established first. And these are the big rhythms, not the small ones. These are what is important in the initial stages. Don't start the drawing by adding details first. First, you add the big underlying rhythms. Now, there's no way to enter this picture, just as there's no way to enter this photograph here. So, in order to enter into this picture, I need to establish something that will allow the eye of the viewer to enter into the picture and move back to where the trees are. And so I'll add this road here, which is another rhythm. So something like this. Now the eye can enter here and follow the road back to this large tree. Now even the clouds are established with this curving linear rhythm. A great painting is one in which there is rhythm everywhere, and every element of design is added rhythmically. Now this is something that you need to learn about. I'm just quickly introducing you to this important concept in art that is neglected by so many beginners because they simply don't know about the importance of this. They watch a video in which the artist paints a picture, but they don't see the knowledge that the artist has of this rhythm that he or she establishes in the picture, because he or she isn't mentioning this. They're showing you certain techniques of painting without first telling you about the importance of establishing this kind of rhythm that I'm introducing you here to. And it's rhythm not just of line, but of color and value and shapes. All of the elements of design that you need to learn about are rhythmically applied to a composition. But without this, you don't have a sound foundation on which to build the details and the more realistic looking images. This is your foundation. And with this kind of strong foundation, you can't go wrong. Once you establish this underlying rhythm, then you can go in there and add the details and light and shadow, but don't lose the strong, basic underlying rhythm that you establish. So here you can see me adding the shadows, but I'm thinking about not losing the strong rhythm that I established. You will lose some of the rhythm, however, when you start adding details and start breaking up the shapes somewhat. So it's not going to be exactly the way you initially establish it, but you don't make so many changes that you lose the rhythm entirely. And in the clouds, now you can see that this is very rough. I'm just introducing you to this concept. I'm just trying to make you aware of learning about this very important part of composition. So I'm not going into this in a lot of detail. This is a short lesson, an introductory lesson to the importance of establishing this underlying rhythm before you start adding details. So I could add some more tone, making these trees one big dark mass like this. But I'm keeping some of that underlying rhythm intact, even though I'm adding this additional tone here. As I said, do not lose that rhythm entirely. It will be weakened somewhat, as I mentioned, when you add detail and tone, but don't lose the rhythm entirely. And I'll make this tree darker, which is more important than the other trees. I'm still thinking about that underlying rhythm, like this. See? Still thinking about the curves that I established. I haven't lost them, even though I'm adding this tone and detail. And I've added a few sky holes in the tree, here and here, where you can see the background sky coming through, and then I'm adding some smaller spots and dots here and there to suggest leaves. You can see them right there and here. So a little detail here and there is added. And maybe shadow going across the road like this. I don't want to spend too much time on this. And suggest some tone in the foreground here, like that. And I think I'll lighten those hills back there to push them further back into the distance. And some tone on the clouds, just a little bit like that. But you can see in this quick, rough sketch that I retained the underlying curving rhythms throughout, even though I've added tones and details and changed the shapes. So even though you add these various other things to this underlying rhythm, make sure you don't lose that rhythm entirely. There's a lot more to learn about this than what I've shown you here. I can't show you everything because this is a short art lesson. And in addition, you can see that I didn't copy the photograph here exactly the way it is. I've made all sorts of compositional changes, which is also what you need to do. So therefore, you need to learn about composition and how you can change the photograph so that you don't copy all of the mistakes that are found in a photograph like this. I hope you'll do some practice work establishing this kind of underlying rhythm before you go ahead and start making changes to shapes and adding tone and detail. Do a lot of these kind of sketches, and you'll begin to realize the importance of establishing the rhythm first, and not jumping right away to doing a really detailed and finished looking drawing or painting. That comes later, after you've established this kind of foundation first. I think I'll add a tree over here so that this whole shape is anchored to the left border here. And that's another important thing about composition. You need to anchor your shapes at least to one or two of the picture borders. So right here at the bottom of the picture border, the shape is anchored to the bottom of the picture border by the road. See, this all makes one big shape, one dark mass. Like this, if I add some darker tone here to the road, it makes one big overall dark shape. And that shape is anchored now to two borders, the bottom border and then over here on the left side. It's very important. Otherwise, a shape like this, if it's not anchored to the borders, it'll appear to just be floating within the picture space. And I also have to add some shadows here to those other trees further back. Now this is just a rough sketch, so I'm not going to be too exact here, too precise with everything. So just roughly like this, there is the shadow from those other trees. As I stated earlier in this video, you can have a rhythm that predominates, such as these curves here forming a rhythm, and that's what you see in this little sketch here, as I showed you. But then you also need a counter rhythm. You need rhythm and then counter rhythm, something to oppose the predominating rhythm. Otherwise, you're going to have too much of one kind of rhythm, and that's not good. You need something that provides relief from that predominating rhythm, some opposing rhythm, such as, for example, if I added a rhythm of these straight lines here. They oppose these curves. So that's what I need to do here. I need to apply straight lines. Now, where do I apply them? Well, what I could do is I could add a fence, which has these straight lines here, going back like that. And then I could add some straight lines here to the fence, these boards, let's say, going back like that. So now I've introduced some relief, and I could do the same over on this side here, where I have this light value fence going back in space, providing these needed straight lines. And I think I need to add another post here, straight line, like that. And these boards also provide straight lines. Then I could add some shadows cast by this fence. The posts can be considered thick lines. The edge of the post is also considered a line, and that is straight. And then as the posts get thinner, as they move further back in space, they look more like lines and less like shapes. I also added these shadows falling across the road, and these shadows over here, which are straight lines. They're considered lines. They look like lines, so therefore they can be considered lines. If it looks like a line, it is a line. Now, another thing I want to mention, you may be thinking, well, are these really rhythms? I've only seen this sort of thing. When an art instructor talks about rhythm, they apply this kind of line. Sure, that is a rhythm, of course, and it's called a reverse curve. But having just a curve like that and repeating it also sets up a rhythm. What about the straight lines, you might say? Aren't rhythmic lines supposed to be curving like this or like that? No. Straight lines also set up a rhythm. What is a rhythm? A rhythm is established through repetition. So if I repeat a straight line like that, like you see here, I set up a rhythm, no matter what kind of line it is. I could have a broken line like that, you see over here? And if I repeat it, I'm setting up a rhythm. And that line isn't like this. So there are different kinds of rhythms. Rhythm doesn't just refer to these kind of curvilinear reverse curves. The beginner seeing a photograph like that is going to try to draw or paint it pretty much the way he or she sees it. And if you do that, you're going to copy all of the errors that are also in the photograph. You can see the many changes I made to my drawing. I'm not following this photograph. If I did, I would have copied all of those errors. And of course, there is no fence to be seen here. But this little sketch needed something like that in order to introduce that rhythm of these straight lines that I talked about. So, the only way you're going to know what changes to make to the photograph, if you're working from a photograph, is knowledge. Knowledge is what makes all the difference. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. The more knowledge you have, the better your drawings and paintings are going to be. And specifically, what you need is the knowledge of the fundamentals. You don't always need to use these kind of rhythmic lines or these curves. As I pointed out to you, a rhythm can be just about any kind of line, straight or broken lines like this. So therefore, what I could do is establish a rhythm not of these curves like I did in my sketch here, but rather I could start with a rhythm of these broken lines as they're referred to. So I could start like this, establishing that kind of rhythm first. And I'm not even sure what this could be at this stage. But you can see the broken line. You see how it angles like that? That is considered a broken line. And that broken line is being repeated everywhere. So this now becomes the underlying rhythm for this little sketch here. So I could add another broken line here maybe. Now I have all these broken lines, and I have a rhythm of basically straight lines. So I need to establish a counter rhythm, like I said. Here you see rhythm, counter rhythm. So maybe what I could do is I could add some kind of structure here, some kind of futuristic building. Since I'm a science fiction and fantasy illustrator, I tend to think imaginatively. I tend to think of the future, what those buildings are going to look like. So I'm not sure yet what this is going to look like. Maybe smaller structures here. But you can see I'm already establishing this rhythm of these curving lines, which contrast with these straight, broken lines. And in the sky, the clouds would have these curving lines as well. So I'm introducing counter rhythm in the sky. Rhythms evoke certain feelings or emotions within the viewer. You get a certain feeling from these straight, angular, broken lines. Quite a different feeling from those curving lines that I used in that landscape with the trees. So Rhythm helps to communicate emotion, express emotion or a mood. So I could maybe add these rhythmic lines, these curving rhythmic lines down here. This could be water flowing in these curved linear rhythmic lines. So now I'm introducing this kind of rhythm here, which contrasts sharply with the broken line rhythm. Now in nature, you're not going to find perfect straight lines like that. But this is how you establish the forms in the initial stages. And then, once you have this underlying rhythm established, then you go in there and you add those irregularities that you find in nature, within the forms of nature. You see the irregularity right there? It's no longer straight like that. But that's how I started. So once you have the rhythm, then you start adding the details and all of the irregularities found within the forms of nature. So you establish these big rhythms, but those big broken line rhythms extend down to the smallest sizes. They're found everywhere. For example, right here, see that broken line that I added? Then there's another one here, and here, and here, and here. They don't just end with these big shapes that I'm establishing, with these big rhythms, but they extend down to the smallest sizes. So they're found everywhere, creating a strong, unified whole. That's what you need to aim for. The beginner is completely unaware of what I'm talking about here. And as long as the beginner doesn't learn this, understand this, they will remain at the beginner level. The only way you're going to move forward, the only way you're going to advance and move up as an artist, producing better and better work, is by applying the rhythm. Rhythm needs to be applied first, just like I've shown you. And once you have that as your underlying structure, your support for the detail and the tone and the color and everything else that is applied, then you can be sure you're on your way to producing a really great painting or drawing. But that rhythm needs to be there, that underlying rhythm. And then right over here where that straight line is, that straight line then can be changed to the kind of irregularity you find in nature. But that broken line is essentially still there, even though I've added those irregularities. So I'm doing this really quick, as you can see. So this is some kind of canyon. And then I could add other rhythms, other shapes. So for example, if I add a shape like this over here, I could repeat it. First, I established the simple overall shape. And I talked about this earlier in the video. So now I've established a rhythm here of these shapes because I've repeated these triangle-like shapes, which, by the way, also have this broken line. And see, that's a broken line. And then I could develop that further. I'm doing this really quick. These could be buildings, maybe. Now, if I want to add more buildings, again, I don't do a careful drawing of a building like this. No, I establish the simple overall shape. And I can repeat that shape, thereby setting up a rhythm. Remember, rhythm is established through repetition. So you need something to repeat. If I just put one shape in there, I don't have any rhythm. If I repeat that shape, now I have a rhythm. Even if I just repeat it once, a rhythm has been set up. So this could be some kind of small city, maybe. And this building, as you can see, has curves, while these buildings set up a rhythm of these triangle-like shapes. So they have straight lines which oppose the curves found in this structure. So I have rhythm and counter rhythm. Rhythm, these curving lines, and then counter rhythm, these broken lines. As you begin to refine these rhythms, adding the irregularities and so on, some of that more obvious rhythm will be lost. But even though some of it will be lost, that rhythm will still be there, but it won't be as obvious as it was when you first established it, when you first laid it in. And the important thing is that you don't lose that rhythm completely. Otherwise, what's the point in establishing this underlying rhythm? Now, I'm not going to do a finished drawing here. My purpose was to show you these kind of underlying rhythms. So I've accomplished my purpose, and I don't really need to do a finished drawing. But I will continue to add a bit more tone here, and those mountains further back, they flatten out somewhat. So I've added some more tone, and you can see how I'm losing some of that more obvious rhythm that was there before by adding the irregularities of nature. And then I'm going to maybe darken this part here where the river flows. Add a few light lines, rhythmic lines suggesting the flowing water, and then darken all of this here somewhat. So now the focus is more on this building here. Lighten everything around that building, but then I'll add some darker tone on those other buildings back there, like this. I've added darker tone over the entire picture so that I can now add some lighter values, some highlights here to this structure, curving highlights like this. That rhythm is still there, that curving rhythm. A few highlights in the background where the other buildings are, but not to the same degree as on the foreground building. So the foreground building commands your attention. It becomes the center of interest. A few small darks scattered around the building like that to add interest. And that's about all I think I'm going to do. Lighten that background mountain a bit. Now the underlying structure of this rhythm that I talked about is still there, but you can see that it's no longer as obvious as it was before. And if I continue to work on this, that rhythm will become even less obvious. But I'm not going to lose it completely. Never lose that underlying rhythm completely. No matter how many irregularities you add, how many details you add, that underlying rhythm must still be there. It must be felt. You can see that I added this curve here, and there's also a straight line there. To oppose those curves, always add that counter rhythm. Don't have everything curved or everything straight. And right now, all the attention is directed here. So if I want the eye to move somewhere else, and that's important, you don't want to rivet the eye in one spot and not take in the rest of the picture. So what I could do is add a dark value over here, like this. Maybe there's some trees here. And because I increased the value contrast here, the eye is drawn over to this part. So the eye travels over to that part, and the river also is moving in that direction. But then this shape here has an arrow shape to it, which is pointing back into the picture toward these buildings and then back again to the center of interest right there, or the focal point. So these are the kind of things about composition that you need to learn if you don't know them. And you'll learn all of this stuff from my complete illustration art course, and much more that you need to know and understand if you ever hope to produce really great work. There's no way around it. You have to gain the knowledge. The more knowledge you have about the fundamentals, the better your work is going to be. I have to make a few changes. Since the light is coming from this direction, the shadow can't be on that side. So I have to add the light on this side, and I'm thinking of that broken line rhythm as I'm adding the light side and the shadow side. And then this part is going to be in shadow, so is this part. Darken some of this in the foreground here a bit, gradually getting lighter as the forms recede back into the distance. I don't want to do too much on this. This is not a finished sketch. And you can see me adding these broken lines right there. I think I'll lighten the background mountains a little bit more to increase the feeling of depth. There's a gradation that's taking place, a gradation of value, moving from darker values in the foreground to lighter values further back, and then to even lighter values. So that helps to create a sense of depth or feeling of distance, this gradation from dark to light. And now I'm going to move on to something else which is important for you to know about rhythm. In constructing his or her picture, the artist does not arbitrarily invent a rhythmic pattern as an abstract compositional idea. He rather feels the emotion of the scene and finds in his subject those rhythmical elements which best express this feeling. Now let me give you an example of what I just said. Let's say you want to draw a figure and you want to get this feeling or mood across that the figure is relaxing. You have to think about what kind of rhythms are going to express that feeling or mood of relaxation. So I'm going to do real rough sketches because they go quickly and I can get this idea across to you of what I've been saying. So let's say the figure is relaxing. The rhythms that you need to express this feeling of relaxation are these kind of rhythms. You see? This rhythmic line running through the figure. Those lines, repeated like this, form this rhythm that gets that feeling of relaxation across. So he's sitting on his chair and he's just relaxing. But I have to include these kind of rhythms to get that feeling across. You don't just start drawing the figure with its anatomy. You have to think about the rhythms, because the rhythms are what get that mood across, that feeling across. So here he is, and he's just relaxing. Then, once you understand what kind of rhythms need to be applied to the figure, you can then go in there and then draw that figure more accurately. But first, you have to know what kind of rhythms will express the particular feeling that this figure is experiencing. We must show by the action of the body the attitude of the mind. And this is something that the great Leonardo da Vinci said. So you can't go wrong if you follow what da Vinci said. You see, the rhythm hasn't arbitrarily been imposed upon this figure. Rather, the rhythm has emerged from the feeling that I wanted to express. And the way you find the right rhythm is by association. Well, what do you associate an attitude of the body like this attitude of relaxation? Well, you would associate that kind of feeling with lines that are long and flowing and rhythmic like this, you wouldn't associate it with these kind of lines. These jagged, broken lines. That doesn't get that feeling of relaxation across. You see, here again, I did establish a rhythm here, but that rhythm gives you a different emotional reaction than this rhythm does. You see, rhythm is so powerful in getting a feeling or an emotion across that you must understand how to get rhythm into your pictures. And you must know what kind of rhythms will express the particular feeling that you want the viewer to experience when looking at your picture. It's more important to paint what it feels like rather than what it looks like. And you can be sure that all the great artists would agree with that statement. If you're more concerned with what it looks like, that means that you are caught up in documenting the facts before you. If you're painting from life, for example, you get caught up in the details, and you're not focusing on what it feels like. So therefore, what you end up with is a rather trite and dry and boring looking painting, because it's all about facts. It's all about documenting what the object looks like, rather than painting what it feels like. Feeling is the mood or emotion that you're trying to capture, that you're trying to express, that you're trying to get other people to feel who are looking at your picture. If you can get people to feel what you want them to feel, then you have a great picture. Even if the facts aren't all perfect, even if the detail isn't all perfect, but if you can get that feeling across, feeling in the emotional sense, that mood, then you have a successful picture. That's more important than any details or any facts. When you have a figure that is placed into a setting, let's say the setting is outdoors, that setting should reinforce or strengthen the mood set up by the figure. So therefore you need to add those kind of rhythms that are found within the figure, also within the setting. So since I have these rhythmic lines that form this pattern of rhythmic lines within the figure, I need to repeat those kind of rhythmic lines within the setting. So maybe there are some hills in the background here, like this. And those hills have those kind of rhythmic lines, those long, flowing, rhythmic lines that the figure has. So in other words, the pattern of lines that I set up within the figure, forming that rhythm, and when you have a rhythm, you also have a pattern. So that pattern or rhythm is repeated in the background, in the setting. Even in this simple, rough example, I think you get the idea that the pattern that you set up within the figure that expresses that particular feeling that you want to get across, that pattern must also then be repeated within the setting, no matter what that setting is. And when you do that, then the feeling that you set up, or the mood that you set up within the figure, is then strengthened. And because it's strengthened, the mood becomes even more powerful, so that the viewer can more easily feel exactly that mood that you want them to feel. If the setting doesn't repeat that kind of rhythm or pattern, and you just add things there that don't really reinforce the rhythms set up within the figure, then that setting doesn't contribute to strengthening the mood of the figure. See these buildings here? They don't have that kind of pattern of these long flowing rhythmic lines. So they don't contribute anything in terms of strengthening the mood. So there's this farm back there with a silo. As you can see, I just roughed it in. But it doesn't repeat the pattern set up by the rhythm found within the figure, as I mentioned. So if you're going to have buildings back there, then you need to figure out how to get those rhythms found within the figure that express that feeling of relaxation into those buildings. Within the gesture drawing, and this can be considered a gesture drawing, within that gesture drawing, which is the action of the figure that you are drawing, you search for the rhythms that will express the feeling that you want to get across, what that figure is feeling. The rhythms must reflect the attitude of the mind of the character that you're drawing or painting. So let's say the character is an angry character. Again, like in the previous example, you have to try to get that feeling across in terms of rhythm. Therefore, you have to think about what kind of lines do we associate with anger. And this kind of broken line that I showed you earlier, that can get that feeling across of anger, also of danger. So then you have to think about some kind of pose, and you establish within that gesture, that pose, you're searching for a pose. You're not clear yet exactly what the pose is going to be, but you have an idea of what the rhythm needs to be to get that feeling across of anger. And so therefore you apply these broken lines to the limbs, to the arms, to the legs, possibly like this. No, that's not going to do it. But at least you're starting out with this idea in mind of trying to get these kind of rhythms that are associated with anger into your gesture drawing. So I'm searching for some kind of pose that may get that feeling across, and to get that pattern of these broken lines in there. So maybe something like this. So here you see that broken line. And then I could add it within the figure, the costume that he or she is wearing. Maybe there's something like that in the costume. Has that kind of V shape, a broken line in there. And then, if I want to add a setting, some kind of setting that this figure is in, I have to repeat that pattern set up within the figure, within the setting, in order to strengthen the feeling that this figure is supposed to communicate, the emotion of the figure. Now, I'm not going to do an entire figure drawing here, but I think you get the idea. Without me doing a finished drawing of the figure, it's really not necessary. What's necessary is to show you the rhythms that are set up within this figure that help to get this feeling of anger across. And if that's not the right pose, then you go on and you try to come up with some other kind of pose that might work even better in communicating that emotion that the character is feeling. And then he has his hands in a fist, which further helps to get that feeling of anger across. If you want your figures to look like they're anchored to the ground and not floating around, then add a cast shadow like this. And I'm going to add a setting here. And remember, this is the pattern, this is the rhythm found within the figure. So the setting that I'm adding needs to have that kind of rhythm. So I could maybe add some buildings here. And you can see this broken line pattern being repeated here. See right there? See that? And over here as well. And then I could continue this. So here again, there's that broken line. And here also, I'm doing this really quick just to show you that that pattern found in the figure is also repeated within the setting, thereby strengthening this emotion of anger that the figure is feeling, or the character is feeling. I could add some mountains in the background that also have that same pattern or rhythm that is found within the figure. See, that broken line. And I could even add, let's say, a road here. And that road also has that broken line, as it's called. So that pattern that you see here and that has been set up within the figure is repeated within the setting as well. And the result is a powerful feeling that you get because of that. Remember what I said about rhythm and counter rhythm. You shouldn't have just one kind of rhythm like I have here. You also need a counter rhythm. So what I could do is introduce some large clouds in the background, for example. And now I'm introducing another rhythm, and you can see what that rhythm is, I think. It's the curve. Those clouds have these curves in them. So I've introduced a counter rhythm to these angular rhythms. You need that kind of contrast. Otherwise, there's no relief from the prevailing or predominant rhythm. One kind of rhythm must dominate, however. Don't have them competing for attention. So there's less of this rhythm, of the curving lines in the clouds, than there are in these angular rhythms found throughout the drawing. And I can also then introduce some curves within the figure, like here, for example, so that I don't have only this angular pattern or rhythm throughout the figure. There needs to be some counter rhythm within the figure as well. So I added this belt here. And the head adds to this curving counter rhythm also, since the head is an oval. The element of rhythm is perhaps the most important single factor in painting. And that's because it is so fundamental and so intimately related to emotional expression. There is no possibility of laying down laws to govern its planning and use. The creative process is primarily conducted on a level of semi-conscious activity. The artist's own emotional reaction to his subject is the surest guide in discovering and working out the subtle rhythmic relationships which will control his or her picture. Until you're able to get this kind of rhythm into your pictures that I've been showing you, your pictures are not going to be emotionally powerful. It is through rhythm that emotion is expressed in pictures. Here I've been showing you linear rhythms, but there are also rhythms of shapes and values and color and texture. Those also contribute to strengthening the mood, the emotion that you want to communicate. This angular line or broken line found throughout this rough sketch also establishes angular shapes. So this is where a rhythm of shapes comes in that I mentioned. So this right here is an angular shape created by the angular line. And that angular shape is found everywhere within this rough sketch. So here's an angular shape, and here's another one, here's another one, of course, and another one. Let me bring that one back. That's very rough. But you can see that now there's also a rhythm of shapes that further strengthen the mood. So I have this rhythm of the broken lines. I have this rhythm of shapes. And they're angular because the broken line is angular. And there are different degrees of angularity. Some are more acutely angular like that. Some are less angular like that. So there's this repetition of this angle. That becomes the motif that has been repeated. And it's repeated with variations, like I showed you here. Different degrees of angles. And then there's a repetition of the angular shape, and that too has variations of shape. They're not all shapes that look exactly alike. Although they are all angular, they don't all look exactly alike. So variation of shape is introduced. Then lighting is very important in further helping to strengthen the mood. So in a picture like this, in which the mood is one of anger, you don't use soft, diffused lighting. That wouldn't be appropriate. You have to think about what kind of lighting is appropriate for the mood, set up by the figure. So that kind of lighting would be a strong light and shadow. A light that creates strong light and shadow. Like this, for example. If you added this kind of lighting that is more diffused, soft light all over the picture, that wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't help to further reinforce this mood of anger that the figure has. So therefore, it has to be a lighting that creates strong light and shadow patterns. And they're found throughout the picture, not just on the figure. But the strongest light and shadow pattern in terms of strength of contrast is found on the foreground figure, with those light and shadow patterns further back becoming weaker. In addition, there's color. So to strengthen the mood even more, to reinforce that mood even more, you think about what kind of color scheme is going to help to express this feeling of anger. Now, it wouldn't be pastel colors. It would be strong colors that clash with each other, strong contrasting colors. So maybe red could be used. That's associated with anger. Remember I said that you would then need strong contrasting colors. So you wouldn't put, let's say, an orange color in the background here. That wouldn't help to reinforce that mood of anger. What would be more appropriate would be, let's say, a blue. Now, there's a strong contrast of hues. That clash of the two strong contrasting hues helps to further get that feeling across, that mood of anger. And you have to get that rhythm of color in there too. Remember, rhythm is established through repetition. So therefore the red needs to be repeated elsewhere, like I'm doing now. The blue can be extended down into the mountains. The blue mountains, the blue sky. See what a strong contrast is being set up here? That helps to get that feeling of anger across. There are no pastels here, no soft lighting that would contradict the mood that I'm trying to get across. So therefore, what I'm going to do is add that additional element here, which is color. Let me get a stronger blue. That looks too much like a pastel. And a stronger red over here. So now there's line, rhythm of shape, and rhythm of color. So I have to repeat that blue, let's say, within the costume of the figure, right there. Repeating a color sets up a rhythm. Repeating a shape sets up a rhythm. Repeating a line sets up a rhythm. And they all help to strengthen the mood. Strengthen the blue in the background. And then a blue cast shadow as well. So the blue is being repeated in the cast shadow, in the mountains, on this costume. And it is in strong contrast with the red. And then for the ground, I could add something like this. Yellow-orange, grayed yellow-orange, maybe. But I still have that strong contrast of hue that helps to get that mood across. I'm also going to repeat the blue on his belt. So there's more hue contrast on his costume here, further helping to get that feeling of anger across. And I could darken the road a little bit. I'm not going to do a finished painting here. This is just a rough sketch, but in this kind of rough sketch, I can make things more clear to you, because everything is simplified to the extreme here than if I did a more careful painting. What I think I'm going to do is carry this rough sketch somewhat further so that you can see a more finished version of what this rough sketch is. And this way you can see how much of what I established in the rough sketch has been retained in a more finished looking sketch. So I'm going to jump ahead and show you what that more finished looking color sketch looks like. So here's that sketch carried to a much more advanced stage. It's not really a finished painting yet, but that's about as far as I'm going to go with this. And you can see that I kept the things that I established in this simple abstract sketch, these broken lines and angular shapes, and you can see the mountains in the background there. They repeat that angular line or broken line that's found on the figure here, right there, like that, and there, the arms, and that broken line and angular shapes are also found in these buildings back here. So you see the broken line there, there, just like I showed you earlier. And the shapes also, the angular shapes, where the shadow is, like this. I did make some changes, however. For one thing, I didn't add the clouds that I have in this version. But what I did do is I added these birds here. Now you might be wondering why I added those birds. Well, those birds, they create a rather busy texture, creating an agitated feeling that reflects the emotion of anger that this character has. those birds creating that busy texture helps to intensify that emotion. It helps to reinforce that emotion. And I changed the angle of the road here. So those curving lines that I had in this version here, which were found in the clouds, to add that opposing rhythm, I changed that so that the road here now has these curving lines rather than the clouds, thereby introducing this opposing rhythm. And I also added this building here that has a curve like that as well. And then over here you can see a curving line, and right there also, and on his body you can see the curving lines there, and of course here, and even up here. And the birds themselves have a curve to them like that. So that's the counter rhythm to those broken lines and angular shapes. And the shadow, the cast shadow, was pointing in the wrong direction. It was going in that direction, if you remember. And let me bring back that version. So you can see the cast shadow was going in that direction. So since the light is coming from the right, the cast shadow needs to move toward the left. So I had to change that. But you don't see all these things immediately when you're working out a composition. As the composition develops, you begin to see the errors that you made, and you correct them, and you move on. And now it's time to end this video. There are many more things that I'd like to tell you, but unfortunately I can't put everything into one video. That's why it's important for you to understand that if you want to learn more, you're going to have to take an entire art course. And if you think you're going to learn all those other things, those additional things that you need to know by going to the web and watching a bunch of videos at random, well, I can tell you that you will learn certain things that will help you to improve your work. But there are also going to be many things that you're not going to learn from those videos on the web. Like, for example, what I've shown you here. I can be pretty sure that you haven't come across any videos like this that show you what I've shown you in this video. So if you want to learn more about these kind of things, get this kind of knowledge that is not that easy to find, then check out my complete illustration art course. Do a lot of practice work in which you try to get these things into that practice work that I've shown you in this video. If you can't get it into your practice work, then that tells you that you don't yet fully understand this. But if you keep at it, you keep trying to make a conscious effort in applying what you've learned in the video, eventually it will start to appear in your work. And that's when you'll see a tremendous improvement in your work. Moving from that beginner level, if that's where you are at now, to a much more advanced state. A much more professional looking drawing and painting will result. There are many more advanced artists that don't even know about this. And you can see that it doesn't appear in their work. When they paint a character, for example, in a particular emotional state, you don't see the setting or environment reinforcing or strengthening that emotion within the character. So they either don't know about it, or if they do know about it, they're unable to apply what they know to their drawings and paintings. And because of that, their work isn't as great as it could be if they applied this knowledge that I've shown you in this video. Thanks for watching, and lots of luck in your studies. Remember, check out my complete illustration art course to learn all of those additional things that I can't cover in one video.